The other thing that you will sometimes have to do is to build a user interface where the user is going to interact. I'm going to show a quick example of one here, just so that you're on the same page as to what we're talking about. But this is a typical form interface. So there's some kind of menuing over here where I can expand and contract windows. And then there are places I can type specific things in. There are radio buttons that allow me to select what it is that I'm trying to actually do. And then there are buttons that actually tell it to start. This is a very common user interface. You see it every time you try to log into something. You're going to get a login window. You're going to get a place for your username and a place for your password and a submit button. And that's exactly what we're actually going to draw. We're going to draw a login window in both of the languages so that you can see what that looks like. This is obviously quite different than just drawing arbitrary lines because you're allowing the user to interact with the form. So that's what a form is. Let's talk about building a form in Java first with code, and then we're going to use the drag and drop fun. All right, so we're going to begin in IntelliJ. Again, we're going to start off. Again, my goal here is to build a form that has a username and a field where you can enter your username, password, a field where you can enter your password, and then a submit button that allows you to actually submit it back and then evaluate whether the user's logged in correctly or not. I'm not going to do all the checking to make sure the user's is correct. That would just be string compares and whatnot in the back end. I'm just going to show you how to build the UI part of it today. All right, so the first thing that we're going to need is we are going to need a layout. So this time I'm going to use a grid pane. So I'm going to say grid pane, my grid equals new grid pane, and that looks good. All right, in order for that to work, I have to include a bunch of stuff again. So we're going to get grid pane as one of our options, and that is in scene layout. Awesome. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a scene. I'm going to make a scene. So scene, my scene equals new. And this time it's going to use my grid. And I'll do 500, 500 just as a random size. All right, so you'll notice that the grid that I just made is being set as the scene that I'm using. And then down at the very bottom of all of this, I'm going to set this scene on the stage to be my scene. And I'm calling show. So right now this should actually run. And I shouldn't have any problems, but I will get a blank window because there's nothing in the window because I haven't specified anything yet. But there is a layout now on my scene. Great. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of labels. So a label, I'm going to call it user label. Again, just has text in it. And so this is the equivalent of a string, but in a GUI world. So I'm going to say username, and there we go. All right, label also has to be included. Okay, there are possible side effects found. Yes, I'm sure there are. That's fantastic. Whatever, get on with it. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and include it myself manually because I don't want to deal with that. Import, and this one's going to be java fx.scene.control.label. And 1 semicolon. Awesome. Build and run. Nothing has changed because I haven't actually put the label anywhere yet, so I still have a blank window, but it does at least compile now. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into my grid. So what I'm going to do is my grid.add, and I'm going to put the user label into position 0, 0. All right. Now with a grid, what we're doing is, again, picture a table in your mind, and you're going to have a rows and columns. You're going to weirdly specify the column first. That's going to trip you up. It certainly did when I was coding this as an example for the slides. So you're going to specify the column index and then the row index. So by saying 0, 0, because it is indexed, I'm putting it in the top left corner. So at this point, if I build and I run, I'm going to see my label, which says username, and it's all the way in the top left corner of my grid, which is exactly where I would want it. Why am I using a grid? Because over here, I'm going to have the box where they actually type in their username, and then I'm going to have the word password, and I'm going to have them type in their password, and then I'm going to have a submit button. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and make the label for the password. So I'm going to call it pass label, or password label. And this time I'm going to ask them for their password. And I'm going to add that into my grid. This time I'm going to add it in as column number 0, but row number 1, because I want it below the other one. All right, so I should have both labels. There they are. You're thinking, wow, you printed text on the screen. This is so cool. Yeah, okay. All right, so the next thing that we need is we need a input box for them to actually type in their answers. So I'm just going to keep these things together. So this time I'm going to call it text field, and I'm going to call it user text area. I'm going to say new text field. And likewise, I'm going to use another one, which is called password field. Password text area equals new password. Both of these work pretty much the same way. The difference between a text field and a password field is that a text field does not hide what you're typing, whereas a password field does hide what you're typing. I need to include both of these. One is called text field, and the other one is called password field. And it has a capital F. That's why it's highlighting that weirdly. Cool. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and add them in to my grid. So my grid.add, this one is going to be user TA, which is my user text area, and I'm going to put that into column 1, which is to the right of column 0 in row 0. And then I'm going to put the password one, which I called password TA, into column 1, row 1. And we're going to build, and we're going to run. No, we're not. We're going to put in a semicolon somewhere. Really? You would think that I would know to put in semicolons. Hey, look at that. Go me. Okay, so now we have a username and a field where they can type and a password. And just to show the difference, if I type in Enda up here, you see the word Enda. The password field, when I type in Enda, you don't see it. You just see the dots in order to imply that a character has been typed, but you can't see what they are. So that's the difference between a text field and a password field in this particular case. All right, so the last thing that I need is I need a button that actually does a submit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say button submit button equals new button, and the text I want on the button is submit me. Maybe log me in. All right, and where I'm going to put that is I'm going to put it into my grid. And I'm going to put that into column 1, row 2, because I want it down below the other 2. And in order to do that, I need buttons, which is, as you notice, every one of these has its own separate library. Okay. There's my log me in button. Cool. Okay, so this does nothing. I can type, it does nothing, because all I've done is I've defined how it looks. This is how UIs usually get coded. You start off by figuring out where you want all the bits and how you want them to look, and then you deal with the fact that when they press this button, you're going to actually need to do something. So we're going to talk about how to deal with that in just a second. There are a couple of things that immediately strike me as being weird about that particular layout. You wouldn't normally see this all in the top left corner. It would be nicer if this was in the middle of the screen. So how do I go about doing that? Well, the grid actually takes a couple of properties which will make life a little bit easier. So when I define the grid up here, I'm going to do my grid dot set alignment to position dot center. And that has the effect of moving it all the way over to the center of the screen. And position center requires geometry position is what it requires. Will it be nice enough and actually allow me to do this? Well, maybe. Yes, it did. Awesome. Go automated things. Okay. Yes, I would like to stop and rerun. Hey, look at that. That looks like an actual login form. So now the only other thing I would say is it's kind of annoying that these boxes are right on top of each other. Normally, if you've seen a login form, there'd be some space in between them, and this being right below is a bit clunky as well. So we're going to put in a little bit of space here. So I'm going to say my grid dot set vertical gap 10. And we're going to build, and we're going to run. And you see how it used to look. And now when I rerun it, yay, there's spaces in between them. So that's a pretty good looking form. I have done everything that I needed to do there. All right, so that's how we do it in Java. So where is the slides? There they are. You're going to find that is the code that I did just a moment ago. And I did put in a comment here because we're going to fill out a little bit more information in a moment. And when you have written that information later in the video, it's going to go where that comment is. That's going to be important to you later. All right, we could have also done this a different way. And there is a much easier way to do all of this. I mentioned before that there's this thing called Scene Builder. And in IntelliJ, you can also do things by simply dragging and dropping. So I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to say grid pane. I'm going to drag it out here. And you notice that it immediately gives me a grid. And then under controls, I'm going to go down and I'm going to find a label. And I'm going to drag the label over into here. I'm going to drag another label into here. Eek. Now, don't know why it's being like that, but anyway. And then we would have text areas. So basically what it's allowing me to do, text fields, text areas are bigger than text fields. What it's allowing me to do is it's allowing me to actually drag and drop things, and it's building that same interface that I was building before. And then over on the right, there are properties. So I would type in username. And on this one, I would type in password. And you get the general idea. Over here, I would give this a name, which it's right now named text1. I can see the code for each of the things, so I can see its ID, I can see all the various methods that get fired when I put stuff in there, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because it seems pretty obvious. You drag and drop the various bits in there. Each of the things has properties. When you click on the grid, you get properties for it. When you click on a label, you get properties for the label. At any time, it tells you what you're looking at up in the top right-hand corner, and you can absolutely build the same interface that we just built the other way. Does it make you less of a programmer to use this? No, not really. It's just a convenience thing. When you're dragging and dropping, sometimes it's easier to see how it's going to be laid out. In the end, it's actually writing the same code in the back end for you. If you're going to use the drag and drop, this line has to be turned on. With it turned off, everything that I'm doing over there is irrelevant. It's not actually using it. I'm only using the one that I built. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. That's the other method for doing things where you would drag and drop them into the appropriate places. If we go over to, we're going to do the event handler first. Okay, so in our code here, we have all of the looks of what we're supposed to have, but this button does absolutely nothing. So again, I'm not going to code an entire actual login. That's not relevant to what we're going to do here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a piece of text pop up at the bottom that tells you the name that's typed into that box, and it says that they're going to try and log in. So the way that that's going to be done is on this button, I'm going to set an event handler, and I'm going to say when an action happens here, I'm going to want it to do some specific stuff. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is a little bit non-intuitive, which is below all of this in my grid, I'm going to add in an additional text area that's going to have nothing in it. So I'm going to do this right up here. I'm going to say, what am I going to say? I'm going to say label. label, what did I call this? I think I'm trying to remember what it says in the slide, sorry. Text, oh, I'm using it as actual text. Okay, so the difference between text and a label is minor. It's just a different way to lay things out. So I'm just going to say action target is new text. All right, trying to be consistent so you end up with the same code and you can see that it does actually work. So it was text action target equals new text. Right, and that has nothing in it. I'm not setting the text to anything at the moment. So okay, so that turns that on. And I'm going to add that to the grid. I'm going to put action target into 1.6. It's putting it all the way down at the bottom. As a matter of fact, I've put nothing past row 2 at the moment, and now magically I'm putting something in row 6. It understands that that means that the other rows are all just going to be blank. All right, so that's nothing magical. That's just me putting some text down at the bottom of the screen. And again, I could have done it with a label. It would have worked the same. I just happened to use text for whatever reason. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define what happens when the button is pressed. So let's review. We have a button that is called submit button. And right now, there's nothing magical about submit button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say submit button dot set on action, and then I'm going to have a new event handler action. All right, and you note that when I tabbed that complete, it went ahead and put in the override for the handle taking in the event. This is what's always going to happen. Nothing here is particularly magical. That's why it can autofill all of this. You are always going to have an override of handle, which is how you are handling this event. The event that's happening, the action that's happening, is coming in as a particular type of action, which in this case is going to be the button was pressed. There are many different actions that can happen to things. So with radio buttons, they can select something or they can unselect something. In checkboxes, they can check or uncheck. In the case of sliders, they can move it left, move it right, they can let go, they might be able to double click. So there may be different events that can be handled. And you will write separate code to handle each of those different kinds of events in here. You'll say, if it's this kind of event, I want to do this. If it's that kind of event, I want to do that. We're going to have a whole section on event handling, so don't worry about that too much, but I do want you to get the general idea that this is how you would go about coding it. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to use action target, which you'll remember was my block of text, which right now is blank, and I'm going to change it to action target dot set text. And what I'm going to set it to is I'm going to get the text out of the username box. So I'm just going to run this again so you can see the window. So to review, of course it won't let me run it right now because I'm in the middle of typing. To review, well, here we can cheat and we can do it over here in the C# window. No, we haven't done it in C# yet. Bugger. All right. There was a username and there was a password, and each of them had a box. And what I'm going to do is take the text that whatever the user typed into the username box, and I'm going to write that on the screen. So how do I get to that text? Well, that text is in this text field up here, which is called user TA. So I'm going to say, I want you to set the text of this new label to user TA.getText. What I'm saying here is reach into that field, which is a text field, and pull out the text for me, and that returns to me a string. And now the rest of it is just the words attempted to sign in so that I get something that's nice and clean on the screen. All right. Assuming that I didn't do something dumb, the world should compile. And I did. Action target, can't find because I probably typoed it as I always do. Nope, what happened is I defined it after I used it, which is not very smart. Hey, look at that. Now it's happy. Yeah, you can't just magically use a variable you haven't defined yet. Turns out it's picky about that. Who knew? All right, so we're back to my same form. I'm going to type in enda, and then I'm going to type in my password, which of course is some nonsense, and now I'm going to hit this button. When I hit this button, what is going to happen is this button is called submit button, and submit button has onset action, event handler, handle. It's going to change this block of text, which is down here right now and is currently blank. It's in row number 6. Remember, that's where I put it. I put it in column 1, row 6. but it's currently blank. So when I press this button, it's going to change the text in this field down here to say Enda attempted to sign in. Okay, so hopefully you can see that that's the general idea of how you would write a handler. The handler takes an event. The event in this case is a click of the button, and it runs whatever code you tell it to run to do whatever it is that you want it to do. Of course, I could have done a million things in here. This is just an example so that you can see it, that it's printing something out on the screen so that you can actually see what's happening. All right, so that is my event handler. That is how you would do all of this in Java.